Hello there and welcome to another Tank Talks with Ungainly Titan. Last week I spoke about tank armor, where to shoot tanks, how to find out about where to shoot tanks and how to find out about the tank armor and possible weak spots, and I'm going to continue this discussion in this episode. Generally in a tank you'll find the strongest armor in the front of the tank, weaker along the sides, weakest armor often on the back. The underside of the tank and of course the top engine deck often weak as well. Turret follows a similar pattern, but there are exceptions to all of this. So if you are facing a tank, usually in front, the weakest spot in front is the lower front plate. If you can't penetrate there, you can always try the commander's hatch. That's usually a weak spot in many tanks. If there are no obvious weak spots in the tank, you can have a go at the turret cheeks, if you can hit them. Hitting the turret cheeks is not always the easiest thing. Flat surfaces are generally better to shoot at than sloped surfaces, though again there are exceptions depending on the tank. Generally for the same thickness of armor, a flat surface is easier to penetrate than a sloped surface, because the sloped surface is actually slightly thicker. Not much, but enough to make a difference sometimes. Also, a sloped surface increases the chance of a bounce. This is why angling your armor is a thing. However, the more you angle your frontal armor, the more side of the tank you expose, which is weaker armor. Other options in the field include side scraping, which is what I am attempting to do here. That basically means you put your frontal weak spots behind a solid obstacle like the wall in front of me, and you show the shallowest angle you can get away with, so when you back out your front is still, or at least as much of your front as possible, is still hidden. My abiding flaws in this is I tend to either over angle or not angle enough and show too much of the front of the tank. If you're doing it right, then most of the incoming fire is bounced off the side of the tank, or it's taken and absorbed by the tracks. It can be a very effective tactic when you get it right. In field conditions, so to speak, angling your armor is something you really reserve for when you're caught in the open and you've no other choice, you've no cover to hide behind. Cover is always better than any other option, because there are always tanks that will just penetrate your tank. Here I'm angling my armor, but I'm also heading down into the low ground to get some terrain between me and the enemy tank. So some tanks though, however, are very effective at armor angling. A lot again depends on the individual tanks and whether or not they have frontal weak spots and how well players know the frontal weak spots of particular tanks. Some tanks are completely unsuited for a lot of these tactics. The best thing really is to use terrain and cover to get yourself into positions where you're hull down and the absolute minimum of tank is being seen over the by the enemy. So this is what I'm trying to do here most of the time. I'm actually saying hull down and just using the gun depression and the slope of the ground to cover as much of my tank as possible. However, when I do get out, I run into another DW2, and here I'm going to be using armor angling, and he is going hull down. One of the things about the DW2 is that flat upper plate is actually quite strong, and standard ammunition on a DW2 won't penetrate another DW2. So I actually switched to premium, but then I might not have gotten away with doing it, because then I started going for the commander's hatch. And I seem to be more effective at it than he is. He's bouncing shots off of the front of my turret and off the ground, which leads you to suspect he might be using auto aim. The other abiding flaw, of course, I have here is that when I switch to premium ammunition, I frequently forget to switch back. So I've been being shot there from two sides, but I was angling at the most dangerous tank that I felt, and I've just used rate of fire to get rid of the other one. So the best defense really is not to be shot at. Use the terrain, use the ground, stay as minimum exposed as little tank as possible to the enemy. Stay hidden if you can, and if you have to go in, then you use things like side scraping and armor angling, and also keep your tank moving. It makes it harder to shoot the weak spots if you keep your tank moving. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about auto aim and the use of auto aim in the wild. Last week I mentioned, or in previous episodes definitely I mentioned, one of the uses of auto aim is to check that you have a line of sight with an enemy tank. And sometimes you'll get auto aim to lock on, for instance, even though you don't have a line of sight, but the tank is, the auto aim is pointing at a tank. For instance, the auto aim would lock onto that tank, but it wouldn't point to the little bit that's exposed above the ground. It would be pointing to the center of mass of the tank, below the ground. Sometimes with howitzer type guns you can actually exploit that to drop shells onto tanks that you can't otherwise target if they're very close to the top of the cover that they're hiding behind. As an aside, but while I have a clip showing me here, this guy opens fire with an autocannon, and as soon as he starts, you'll notice a lot of the fire is missing, because one of the reasons he's just squeezing the trigger and firing off very long bursts, so the dispersion of his gun maxes out. So his gun is constantly at its maximum dispersion. You're better off with auto loaders and auto aiming autocannons to actually fire in shorter bursts. Now here we're looking at me. I'm using auto aim on this guy, but he's moving slowly enough that he never travels more than a tank length in front of me while I'm firing. Auto aim works best really where you're shooting at a target that's either stationary or moving a lot slower than you are. However, you have to keep an eye on the reticle and only really fire when the reticle is lit up on the target. Otherwise, if you're just squeezing the trigger without paying too much attention to the reticle, you'll bounce and miss a lot of shots. We have another example of it here, where I'm shooting at that thing. Now I think I bounced the first shot, we hit with that one. Then a second fast moving target actually pops into view. There's a bat chat here. Now if you notice, I'm shooting at him when he's either moving directly away from me, or directly towards me, or stationary relative to my gun. When he's moving perpendicular to the direction of my gun's pointing, I don't shoot at him. The last shot there was fired at him when we were both moving parallel and at roughly the same speed, and it still went behind him. Now this is another case here. I'm crossing the front of his, he's relatively stationary compared to me, and I'm approaching him quite rapidly. He auto aims at me, and when he fires, he's actually, the shell passes behind where I'd been, which is the problem with auto aim. So judicious use of auto aim can be very effective. It's particularly effective at close ranges, and when you're moving either towards or away from the target, or you're moving parallel to the target at roughly the same speed, or you're circling a stationary target or a much slower target. Most other occasions, auto aim is likely to miss more often than not. Finally, one last way that auto aim can be quite useful as a bit of an exploit is that if you're a ridgeline fighting like here in Prokhorovka, and there are a lot of enemies on the other side of the ridge, you don't want to hang around manually acquiring targets. It's very easy to just auto aim to the target and then either zoom in to place your shot or just fire off a snapshot. Now in the case of the T-29 which I'm using here, I'm more inclined to place the shot because the frontal turret armor of the T-29 is exceptionally strong, even against Tier 8 or even Tier 9 tanks. However, if I was in something like a Comet, which has a very high rate of fire, I might be much more inclined to just pop up, snap the shot off and hope for the best, rather than actually hang around and give people an opportunity to shoot back at me. And the gun on the Comet is generally penetrating enough that a certain percentage, a decent percentage of those shots will actually go through. So it's kind of horses for courses, but it is another thing that auto aim is quite useful for. So that's enough blathering on, I think, in this one, and that's it for this week. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again soon.